What stops highly comedic characters from becoming comic relief knockoffs? Comedy, in my opinion, is possibly one of the hardest things to write. You need to meticulously craft setups, time payoffs perfectly, and have the right people to deliver the jokes in order for them to seem confident. And most terrifyingly, the stakes of comedic writing are very, very high. If you fail to pull off a gag or a joke, it can at best make people cringe, and at worst completely ruin the emotional impact of a scene. Writing a consistently funny or goofy character is even harder. You're having to come up with fresh ideas for them every day, every week, every episode, and you want the audience to emotionally connect with them at the same time as laughing at them. I've been rewatching Golden Age Simpsons recently and have found the show even funnier as an adult than I ever did as a kid. But of course, the show is filled with caricatures and constant gags, constant humour, and especially the main cast, Homer Simpson, Bart Simpson. How did the Golden Age of Simpsons pull this off? How did it become such a beloved and iconic show? The following essay is going to explore what exactly comic relief is, how it's been used poorly, and then of course offer some advice on how to do it correctly. I'm John from the Author's Anvil, and I hope you enjoy the following essay. So, what exactly is comic relief? Let's first get some definitions and scope for this little exploration. LiteraryDevices.net gives the following definition of what comic relief is. Comic relief is a literary device used in plays and novels to introduce light entertainment between tragic scenes. It is often used in the shape of a humorous incident, a funny incident, a tricky remark, or a laughing commentary. This makes a lot of sense to me, as the phrase taken literally means to relieve using comedy. Comic relief can be a good tool to keep audiences from not slipping into an existential crisis if you're exploring particularly dark themes, and it can just be a nice additional emotional beat to put into a scene if appropriate. Many of the older playwrights, such as William Shakespeare and Oscar Wilde, use this literary device to great effect, and we also see it being used in modern shows such as Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Scrubs. See this video for more information. However, there are of course many instances of comic relief being used less than effectively. Anyone who hates himself enough to watch the latest Marvel or Star Wars flick has to ensure that earplugs and eye bleach are at the ready to deal with some of their, funny characters. But hold up, there is something else we need to talk about before we go into why certain comic relief characters work and some do not. The definition I just gave is the traditional definition, but not the one I think most people nowadays commonly associate with the characters that we're talking about. I think now when modern audiences think of comic relief, they think of characters who are almost constantly being comical or stupid. They are not occasionally relieving that dramatic tension that we were talking about earlier, they are just the funny character. They are the one who is supposed to make everyone laugh all the time. Even when they're having a restful or mid-stakes scene, this comic relief character will be there, cracking jokes, and being their usual goofy self. I think Jar Jar Binks is a pretty good example of this from the Star Wars prequels. Every line of dialogue that comes out of that monstrosity's mouth is meant to sound silly, and even when our other characters are just chilling or walking between places, we can see him getting into hijinks and fun activities. Another example could be Moss from the IT crowd. Moss is a stereotypical 2000s nerd, back when nerd culture was actually niche and taboo, and the vast majority of his screen time is him getting into silly, social awkward situations, him being goofy, and of course some good old absurdism as well. I'm going to give you a quick pop quiz. One of these characters is hated by the majority of its fanbase, while the other is beloved. Wanna guess which one it is? No, we're not doing this. Moss is clearly the better character. Jar Jar Binks is still reviled by pretty much everyone in the Star Wars fanbase. To be clear, this is nothing against the actor, Ahmed Best, who did his best with a terrible script and equally terrible direction. The issue is that Jar Jar was just fundamentally a very poorly written character, and was a jarring addition, pun intended, to the Star Wars universe. But what exactly is it about him that doesn't work? Or rather, what is it that makes other highly comical characters, such as Homer Simpson, Niles Crane, Dr. Zoidberg, Moss, etc., work? Well, let's now dive into why exactly these characters work. This is a common piece of advice you'll find for creating many types of characters, and it definitely rings true for comic relief ones too. If you want a surefire way for your audience to connect with a character, then inject them with some good old-fashioned relatability. Show us them struggling with a common day-to-day problem or having a relatable hobby. Let us know that they can feel a whole range of emotions that go beyond just goofiness and silliness. And don't make all of those other emotions ridiculously over the top. Yes, you can show that they're super cowardly or they're super lighthearted. You can't dial every emotion they feel up to 10 because that's just not realistic. They lose that relatability. The vast majority of human beings do not experience emotions at these incredible levels, so neither should your characters. But why do you want your audience to connect with the comedic character? Well, think about it in real life. When you feel like you have something in common with someone else, then you naturally warm up to them. You are much more likely to want to listen to them or laugh with them. You're also, in this case, much more likely to be forgiving of them if they're a little socially awkward or if one of their jokes falls flat. This is important because, as mentioned earlier, the consequences of a poorly executed joke are much higher than failing to pull off other character beats. By making your comic relief character relatable, you're not only making the audience like them more, but you're also giving them a bit of a safety blanket for when one of their jokes doesn't come off as the way that you intended it. Jar Jar Binks is not a relatable character in the slightest. We are given next to nothing about his life outside of the story other than he was banished for being clumsy. Does Jar Jar have a family or close friends? Does Jar Jar have hopes and dreams? Does Jar Jar have a hobby or a favourite kind of sandwich? What does Jar Jar like to do in his free time? I really struggle to answer any of these questions, and I should not have to read a wiki page or expanded universe novel to get them. The answers to these questions should be given within the film. You don't have to give us much, George, but dear God, give us something. But now let's look at some of the comic relief characters who are a bit more relatable. Moss from the IT crowd is a complete nerd who is socially awkward around normal people, especially women. Kronk from The Emperor's New Groove has the struggle of being under a tyrannical boss. Homer loves watching TV, eating food, drinking at the bar with his buddies, and finding ways to make his life hilariously easier. None of this is particularly deep or groundbreaking stuff, but it's so essential and it's enough for the audience to latch onto. Relatability as well is even more important when it's a non-human comic relief character that you're presenting, because they have a fundamentally different experience than a human being does. You therefore have to actually put in much more work to make that character more relatable, because we already have the barrier of them being an alien. I think Quark from Star Trek Deep Space Nine is a really good example here. Yes, he's a Ferengi with weird ears, but he's a business owner. He has a family who he interacts with. We feel his indignation, his triumph, his pain, and everything in between. Tell me, dear viewer, what is Jar Jar's pain? What relatability can we exactly latch onto here? He's this weird cartoon rabbit alien thing that fails upward and relies on the Jedi to do most of the work for him. So for the love of God, here is my first piece of advice. If you want your comic relief character to not be completely insufferable, then please give them some relatability for us to latch onto. As I said, we don't need anything deep or gut-wrenching in their backstory. We just need something that gives us that relatability and that grounding into the character from the get-go. Let's get a little deeper here. I want to next talk about the importance of heart. What exactly do I mean by heart? Well, what I mean here is that comic relief characters should still have other emotions that aren't comedic, and preferably within that relatability that we were just talking about. Remember that episode when Homer connects with his long-lost mother, and then at the end of the episode she has to leave and go back on the run, and then we're just left with this lingering shot of Homer sat on the hood of his car? We expect some sort of last punchline or stupid line from Homer, but it never comes. Remember when Homer is telling the story of how he quit his job at the nuclear power plant to pursue his dream of working in a bowling alley, but then Marge to fall pregnant, thus forcing him to return to the nuclear power plant to earn enough money to support his family? And then we find out that the missing photos from the family album are at Homer's workstation in order to give him strength to persist working at his current crummy job. Remember when Homer is presented the perfect opportunity to cheat on Marge with a co-worker while out of town, and then at the last moment breaks down and instead flies Marge over to the work conference so they can instead enjoy a night together as husband and wife? Many people often forget that Homer, at least in the golden age of Simpsons, was more than just a slob. He was more than just a dumb father. Yes, a lot of his screen time is him saying silly things or him getting into ridiculous antics, but beneath all of that is a man who deeply loves his family and has a heart of gold. And the writers of Golden Age Simpsons like to remind us of this fact much more than you probably remember. This is what heart is all about. It is about giving your characters, even the really comical ones, moments of true emotional depth. Heartfelt moments come usually at the end of the story when the characters have either overcome a physical or emotional struggle, grown as a character or learned something profound, or lastly, has done something kind or loving towards another character. What sets great comic relief characters from terrible ones are these heartfelt moments. Heavily comedic characters often fall on the wayside here because writers, directors, or studio executives fall into the trap of funny character must always be funny because if audience isn't laughing at them every few minutes, then funny character is no longer the funny character and audience will get bored. So my piece of advice here is this: do not forget to give your heavily comedic characters the heartfelt moments that they deserve. Even just one scene in a film or one scene in a season of television where we get to see vulnerability within that comedic character can work absolute wonders. And also, don't be afraid to put your comic relief characters on those helpful little things called character arcs. You can turn a comic relief character into a serious one if you want to, or vice versa. It's all about just putting in time and effort to pull off that character arc effectively. And I found as well that when that has been pulled off, it's been very effective because the two different personalities have such a contrast that it makes that character arc even more impactful. Just make sure you put the work in like Steve and Ira Bear did for Nog in Deep Space Nine. Spoilers, by the way. Nog starts off as a petty child criminal who just causes hijinks and gets his best friend in trouble all the time. His antics are often played for laughs, and at first it really does seem as though he's destined to just be a comic background character. But no, Nog goes on quite a journey. We see him join Starfleet and grow up. We see him become an accomplished engineer and soldier. We see him, well, I don't want to spoil the rest. Nog is one of the most beloved side characters in all of Star Trek, for very good reason. You would not have thought, watching the first season of Deep Space Nine, that this silly little troll would become one of the most deep and heartfelt characters in the entire series. Seriously everybody, watch Deep Space Nine and take notes. To close out this video, I want to return to the definition that we explored at the start of this. Comic relief characters have quite a bad name attached to them, and let's be honest, for pretty good reason, but that doesn't mean that we can't bring them back. Let me remind you about their narrative purpose. They are important tools for providing, well, relief in those dramatic and heavy scenes. There is only so much edge, misery, and darkness that even a gremlin like me can take in a story, and so having a character who can provide us with a little levity or a little break from all of that can be very welcome when executed well. However, making them do wacky things or writing hilarious dialogue just isn't enough. For them to be satisfying and not completely insufferable, we must try and do the following. Give them clear, relatable traits that help endear us to the character, and give them heartfelt moments where we can watch them struggle, grow, or help another character. And let's just also state the obvious here. A huge problem with many comedic characters and comic relief characters is just that they are way too over the top. Try and dial back the comedy a few notches. Instead of them slipping on 20 bananas, maybe they just slip on one. And for God's sake, do not make your comic relief character interrupt every heartfelt scene with a stupid quip. It's bloody rude. That's all I've got for today. Thank you so much for watching. As always, there is way more to say about this topic and about comedic characters in general, but I think hopefully those points that we've just covered will help kickstart that comedic writing process and make your characters a little less insufferable and a little bit more beloved. Regardless, I hope you curious souls have wonderful days. Thank you again so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.